What will our world be like in 6 months' time? What will the church be like in 6 months' time? I don't think there'd be too many of us who would have thought that we'd be sitting here with the distancing that's going on now, the situation of what's happened in the world over the last 5 months, the last 6 months. Over the last few weeks, I've been reading and reflecting and seeing what other people are saying about what the church should be doing over the next 6 to 12 months. We know there are a lot of people, and many of them have, for reasonably good reasons, or for some for very good reasons, have stayed at home at this stage. But where will they be over the next few months? Eventually, we all need to take a step out, as many of you have done in the church today. It's great. But where will our church be, and what is our focus for the church over the next 6 months, the next 12 months? And I think we can learn something from St. Aloysius, whose feast we celebrate today. Over the last 6 months, not quite 6 months, in Italy alone, as of yesterday, it was just under 35,000 people have died from coronavirus. That's in Italy. And then you've got the deaths right across the world. 35,000. In 1591, 60,000 Italians died of the pandemic that happened in that year. And one of them died on this day in 1591. He was a 23-year-old. His name was Aloysius Gonzaga. He became a saint. And in the years after his death and the years after that pandemic, the communities at that time looked to the inspiration and the example of St. Aloysius in how they were meant to rebuild after such a devastating time. If you compare what the pandemic's had in Italy now to what it was at the time of Aloysius, the population today is much, much bigger than it was in 1591. And they lost 60,000 of that population. So what did the community at that time, what did they see in St. Aloysius? First of all, they saw in St. Aloysius a man who loved God and he loved the community. And that should be first and foremost what we grapple with as well. St. Aloysius wrote about this gospel that we had today, which is the greatest commandment of the law. Love God, love neighbour. And that became the focus of his life, and that became the focus for the Catholic community after the pandemic. Love God, love neighbour. What else do we know from St. Aloysius? St. Aloysius grew up in a very wealthy family. His family had great hopes for him to go on to become something significant in the military, or perhaps a significant baron or a lord of some sort at that time. But Aloysius responded to what God was calling him to do through silent prayer. And he got a sense that he wanted to join Francis Xavier in the missionary work of the church in India. That was his goal for life. He had a mission. He wanted to bring Jesus Christ to those who'd never heard about Jesus. And he set that as his goal for his life. He never got there, but he had a mission, and he was committed to living that mission. And the years after 1591, when the church started to build, they were clear as to what their mission is. We need to work out what our mission is, what each of our mission is at this time, and what it will be over the coming 6 months, the coming 12 months. St. Aloysius had a mission. What is our mission? What is your mission? What is my mission at this time? It's something to think about. St. Aloysius spent a lot of time in silent prayer, and that became a focus for the church as well after 1591. That they took Aloysius' example of someone who spent intense periods of time in silence. He would just come into the church and spend time in silent prayer. And that was an example for others. Silent prayer is a great way of getting to know Jesus, but it's also a great way of letting out the angst that happens in our lives. We know at the moment mental health has been seriously impacted in almost every single person by what's happened. No one cannot be affected by what's happened. It's created tension for us, It's created anxiety. There is a fearfulness to even go out of the house. There is this sort of, do I get too close to somebody? What's going to happen? All of that's going through our minds, and that impacts us mentally. It also impacts us spiritually. And so the community after 1591 took the example of Aloysius, and they encouraged people to spend time in silent prayer, to just come into the church and to sit in silence. So St. Aloysius had a mission, and we need to find out what our mission is now and into the future. We also need to spend time in silent prayer. St. Aloysius also had a love for the scriptures and a love for study. He's the patron saint of youth, but he's also the patron saint of young students. He had a passion for study. And all of us, whether we're young or right to the very end of our life, we should love to read the scriptures and try to come to a deeper knowledge. St. Aloysius became friends with a number of saints. St. Charles Borromeo, who was the Archbishop of Milan, gave Aloysius his first Holy Communion. And St. Robert Bellarmine gave the last rites to St. Aloysius. St. Robert Bellarmine was inspired by St. Aloysius' life and St. Aloysius' passion for study and formation. And so Robert Bellarmine, in the years after 1591, started a campaign within the church to help people to read the scriptures, and then to study the scriptures. So what can we do as we emerge? We need a mission. Work out what our mission is. How are we going to live the love of God, and how to study the scriptures, read the scriptures attentively. And then something interesting happened in Aloysius' life in 1591. He was studying at university. He was studying theology. And he would go from where he was living at the Jesuit to the doctor. He would carry them to the hospital. He would tend to their needs. After he was doing this for several weeks, his superior said, "No, you can't do this. You must not do this." They banned him from doing this. They said, "You will get sick." And he tried. He said, "I will try. I will try to ignore these people who need help." So he would go from where he lived to where he was going to university. And he realised that he was the Good Samaritan. He couldn't ignore those in need. And so he'd pick these people up again, and eventually he caught the virus himself, which then eventually killed him. Today, I think of those who are our healthcare workers. I know across the world a number of people who've died from coronavirus, or relatives of people who I know who have died of the coronavirus, who've been working in the healthcare industry. Doctors, nurses. It's not easy at this time for them. St. Aloysius is one of the patrons of those who help during pandemics because he helped himself. The love of God is not just something that we think about. That love of God should bring us to service and to charity. Don't just walk on by and say, "Well, I can't do anything." We can all do something. St. Mary of the Cross MacKillop, our own saint, said, "Never see a need without doing something about it." I'm sure those words were inspired by St. Aloysius, his example. He practically saw those in need and he said, "I can't ignore. I'm going to love in the way that Jesus would love. I will lift these people up and do what I can." How do we emerge in the next 6 months? What will our church look like in 6 months' time or 12 months' time? I hope we each have a clear mission to living Jesus Christ today. That we study the scriptures, that we spend time in silent prayer, and that we go, each of us, and do what we can to bring the love of God through service and charity. This is the example of St. Aloysius that was given to our parish. In 1924, they named this parish St. Aloysius. This was a young area, and it's still a young area. We can be inspired by his life of how he and the church community emerged after that terrible pandemic in 1591. Let's learn from the past. Let's live the way of Jesus Christ under the inspiration, that wisdom of St. Aloysius. St. Aloysius,